Welcome to Pinia migration walkthrough. In this video, I'm going to cover our migration plan and I'll show you how one of the stores could be migrated to Pinia. I won't cover component migration, so stay tuned for another video. And let's start. So the first thing we should do is go to the official Pinia page, which is pinia.vue.js.org. Please read through all the documentation that is there. It is required before you start a migration. And I'm not going to cover Pinia differences from Vuex. And also keep special attention for the migration page. I'm also not going to cover what's listed here. So after you've done with that, go to our Pinia docs. This page lists all the best practices and also has a migration guide, which is frequently updated. So please visit this before migrating because it can have up-to-date information that you might need. So let's go to our migration plan. This plan is for bigger stores that you can't migrate with a single MR. If you have a store with 100 lines, you probably won't need this. In any other cases, please follow this plan. Let's actually go through the steps in this plan. So the first thing you need to do is to identify which Vuex stores you are migrating. Let's have an example here. So in my example, I'm going to migrate batch comments store, and it's a part of a bigger scope, I would say. So we have this definition of multiple Vuex modules. And if we ever wanted to migrate any of the modules, basically we would have to migrate the whole thing. So in my case, batch comments requires me to migrate as well page, notes, divs, and findings drawer. Also inside the module itself, you might have different dependencies. And they can look like, for example, if you have dispatch with root calls, that means the call is not happening inside this module, it's happening in another module, and you have to figure out which one it is. Same with getters. So if you have root getters, you have to check which getters are you using and migrate this store. So after you've done with that step, list all the files that you are going to migrate. So in my example, if I wanted to migrate just this store, and if it wasn't used in Vuex modules, I would have to include actions, getters, probably index.js, state.js, and also mutations. And also corresponding tests for these files. So everything that is located in this folder would have to be included as well, because we are also going to migrate specs. After you've done that, you have to create a migration issue and list all the files that you've identified you are going to migrate. Then you need to assign a DRI who is going to be responsible for the whole effort. After that, you will have to go to code owners rule and create a new entry which will protect the files you've listed in the issue. This is important to protect us from regressions during the migration stage. So for example, if we wanted to change something inside of the actions file here, it would have to be replicated in the migrated Pinia store when the migration is in progress. And code owners rule actually looks like this. So if you go here, you can see we already have an example. We've listed all the folders that are kind of affected by this migration, and we have people responsible for coordination effort. So once an MR that touches any of the files inside these folders, it will have to go through either of the persons listed here, and they will be responsible for making sure that changes from these folders get propagated to Pinia migrated stores. So if you see anything like here, like it's changing to false, you'll have to duplicate this change in a Pinia store as well. All right, so let's say we've done with that. Now we'll need to copy all the store files to a new location. So how that actually looks like is that you go to the desired store. Let's see, we have this batch comments folder, and we create another folder. For my example, I've created a store folder, and I've also defined a store here. When you go through this step, please define the store and copy all the files. So let's do just set, except for mutation files. So I'll go ahead and just paste what we have. And that is our first commit in the migration phase. So I'm going to create a new branch. I'm going to call it example migration. And for this demonstration, I'm going to keep everything in a single branch. It's up to you to decide how you want to split your commits and your MRs. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to stay on a single branch. All right, so we finished with the first step. We have all our store code in a single folder, and we have our definition of the new Pinia store. So let's go ahead and commit this. Add batch comments store. Let's mention that it's a Pinia store. And we are done with this step. So what we're going to do next is we are going to apply automated migrations. And this work by using code modes. So I would suggest to go to the Pinia docs first, because it says which commands you need to run. So it says we need to run this command. You need to specify the path to your store. So let's do that. And it should do all the work for us. As we can see, migration has completed, and we can go ahead and check if the files are correctly migrated. So you can see it added a couple of unknown functions to the file. It says use root store, and what it means that previously it was an action that wasn't defined inside the store. So it was using a root action that is not inside batch comments. What we need to figure out is which store was actually providing that action. We can do that by searching for it. So save node was provided by the node store. We already have it migrated. So what we have to do is to say use nodes. And we should be good. Then we have to repeat this step for other usages of the use root store. Or for example, here it was a div store. So it correctly identifies that we wanted to use a div store. We have to correct and use a proper store here. So in our case, it's use legacy divs. If you don't have these stores yet, what I would suggest is to create dummy stores. So for example, if it wasn't batch comments, if it was nodes, you would create nodes/store/index.js like here, and it will be just an empty store without all of this, right? And you just import it in this place, and that way you can stay connected which things are actually required for the migration. This is very important because later during testing stage, you will have to fill in all the missing parts, right? So right now you see these empty functions. They are used for testing only. They are not actual functions that are called. Once we migrate this store, it will be actually populated with proper actions. So let's continue going through our file and see if we missed anything. So let's replace all the use divs with use legacy divs. It's kind of straightforward. Yeah, this one. And use root store, I think it's mostly use nodes. So let's do that. Yeah, and I don't see any more issues with this file. Always manually check your files after you've run any code modes. Then repeat the step with the getters. So this is obviously a nodes store. Let's see if we have any more cases like this. Yeah, this looks good from my perspective, and mutations usually don't need any changes after that. Just double check that you are using the correct code. Also see, you have to fix your imports. So it was previously using mutations from this folder. It's not applicable anymore, so we'll have to go to stores, modules, batch comments, and mutation types. That way it's actually using proper mutation types. And don't forget to correct this for all other files. So in our case, utils was defined in the upper scope. Here it is. And here we have the same problem. I think we are ready to commit this. Please take a note, if you have a lot of things changed in your files, I would suggest you split it into multiple MRs. So this is just for the sake of example, because we have not a lot of changes. I think it's reasonable to keep it in a single commit. The next step is to migrate store specs. And as you can see, I've made a big mistake here while migrating the store. So I forgot to copy the specs. Because I'm keeping everything in a single branch, the mistake is actually quite easy to fix. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to locate the path of this folder. Now we need to find the same path for the specs. Here it is. And put it in the store folder. The store receives these new files. And because I can reorder my commits, add store, I can simply fix that by committing and squashing two of my commits. So this has to be grouped. Let's squash it. And now we can migrate the store. I would start with the actions because usually it's the most complicated part. Because migration is not straightforward, I would suggest looking at other migrated stores. So one of the examples is the div store. So use legacy divs. Yeah, and as you can see, the setup for the store is quite convoluted. That is because the store is very big, but it serves as a good reference point for the migration. So let's go ahead and see what's going on here. So first of all, you'll have to create a testing Pinia. This is required for the store to be actually mocked. Let's do that. And let's explore the options that we have here. So stub actions false is actually disabling stubbing of the actions. This is required for testing the actions, because if you comment this, then your actions will be stubbed and you won't be testing actual actions. You will be testing mocks and they don't do anything. So this is required for testing Pinia stores. Then we have a plugin section which defines two plugins. So create custom getters is a special plugin to override getters inside your store. So this is available in Vue 3, and you can do things like this. You can do store my getter equals 1, and it will work with Vue 3. Unfortunately, with Vue 2, it will not work, so we have to use this plugin. You will have to provide it with all the stores that can receive getters, and you'll have to define them explicitly. So in our case, it's legacy divs getters. and it's legacy nodes getters. Since we are testing batch comments, we don't actually have to do anything here. This one allows you to kind of ignore dependency cycles. So let's say we go to our batch comment store and we have this save draft function. It uses another store, which is defined here. And let's imagine this store used batch comments as well. So it said like use batch comments and it did something, right? In that case, you will have a cyclic dependency. That means our legacy nodes imports batch comments and batch comments imports legacy nodes. And that is not good. You shouldn't do that. To avoid that problem, we use something called global accessor plugin. And what it allows you is to write code like this. So you will see things like this here. So this legacy nodes action store tries to avoid importing legacy diffs by using this method. And it goes to global Pinia storage for the stores. So it goes to Pinia internals, as we can see here, right? And it looks for the legacy diff store and it returns it. That's kind of straightforward. The problem with this approach is that we don't have a clear dependency here, so we don't have an import. And also, if you haven't called use legacy diffs before calling this code, it will fail. So you must always initialize your store before calling any of this. Let's see how we should set up the store. I would usually recommend having a shared store variable. And then we say use batch comments, we say, yeah. All right, let's go ahead and see what else we need. We have this helper function called create Pinia test action. And what it allows is to use our Vuex test action without significant modifications. Let's see if our test here uses that. So test action, yeah, we actually can see it right here. So test action is imported here. What we'll have to do is to remove this import. We'll have to define it here as well as the store. And basically that's all that's needed. So let's go ahead and try to fix one of the specs. Let's start with this one. So it calls for save draft on actions. The first thing I will do is to just remove this import because we don't actually need this anymore. And I'll replace all the actions with the store dot. Let's see if we have proper replacements. Yeah, seems like it. So instead of testing your actions explicitly, you test the store, not the actions. So we're calling this save draft method. And as you can see, it provides dispatch as a mocked function. We don't need this anymore. So let's see if we have any references to this. Yeah, we can safely remove it. And calls like this are not needed at all. And let's see what we're actually checking. So this is checking that the save node on the legacy node is called. So let's try that one. They use legacy, or it's use nodes. Yeah, it's one. Use nodes, and we check that the save node was called with the proper parameters. Let's try that one. And we can see that save draft is not a function. It's not a function because we actually forgot to import our store in the store definition. Let's go to batch comments again. what we'll have to do is to remove this and import our actions. Let's double check if that is correct. Should be. And let's try again. Yeah, this is a problem I've talked about. So use legacy divs is used implicitly inside of use nodes. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to call use legacy divs before anything. And that should fix the problem for us. Sorry for the import issues. My IDE is not behaving today. All right, we already have this. Let's try this again. It's actually stores. Okay, we have our first problem. So it tries to read draft node. And this is happening because we are actually calling the real safe node action. But in this case, we don't need to check that the safe node on use nodes is doing what it's supposed to do. So rather, I would say that we just mock implementation or even mock returned value. And it should work. And we have fixed our first test. Let's go ahead and fix the rest of it. So here's an example of using test action. Test action is a little bit different from what we're used to seeing in Vuex. So mostly everything stays as it should, except for two things. So if you have any state defined in the third argument, usually here, you define it like my state here. You can do that, but you cannot do getter definition. So if you say my getter equals 1, it will not work. You have to use the getters we defined previously, like here. Since we are not defining any state in this example, it's not a problem. But then we'll have our actual checks against mutations and actions, and they are a little bit different. So you'll have to explicitly provide with the functions that we are calling. So in this case, we have a add new draft mutation. What we'll have to do is to go to our store and provide it with this exact mutation. So you say types and mutation name. We'll have to import mutation types as well. And since we don't have these mutations defined in the store definition, we'll have to import them as well. So let's do just set import mutations from mutations. And let's try this again. Let's see if we have the correct import. So it's actually batch comments, stores, modules, batch comments, which is weird, but it's Vuex. All right, the second spec is fixed. The rest should be much easier from this point. So don't forget to replace your actions with the store. Remove any commit mocks or dispatch mocks or state mocks. And this spec is actually an interesting one. So it checks that we didn't call for the add new draft. Let's try to do the same thing here. So we say store types that it's not calling add new draft here. Let's try this one. Nice. Let's go ahead and fix the rest. Here we basically doing the same thing as previously. Store types and mutation name. Let's run this. Okay, this is pretty simple actually. Same thing here. Store types, and this one is calling a function of another store. So I would do probably this, use legacy divs and this function. And since it will actually run the action on the store, I would do mocked resolved value. Let's see if it works. And it works. Same story here. So back store to not have been called. Remove the unnecessary mocks. And very good. So this one defines getters and we'll have to work around that. So it overrides get nodes data. I would usually go to legacy nodes getters here, replace it, and we should be good. So when you see commit and context, you can safely remove it. It's no longer needed. Let's see if it works. So this one is an interesting issue. When I look at this code, I see that get nodes data is not defined in the nodes store. It's actually defined in the batch comments getters. So it's basically a pass-through for the nodes data. And we have two different options here. We can either just straightforward remove it and use the nodes store, or we can redefine it. Let's see if it's used frequently in our code. Yeah, it's used in a couple of places in the actions. So I'd rather mock just the getters for the batch comments. So what I'll have to do is to define a new getters definition. So batch comments getters here. And now we can define getters for the store. We'll go to the test and replace it with batch comment getters and see if the test runs now. All right, I think I got it. So our store is not actually defining any getters except for hasDraft, which is a fake getter. So we have to import all our getters. and define them here. And after that, the tests should work. Yeah, and we correct our params. And we're good. Next one is a similar test. You remove all the unnecessary stuff. You check that you have not called this. And it works. So we have another getters definition here. So we've learned that get nodes data is coming from batch comments getters. We change it here. Then we see state definition. I would usually, in cases like this, to just a patch of the store. So I will go ahead and say store patch and provide it with the state that we want to update. Then we no longer need this. So now our store contains proper state. We remove this context, it's not neat anymore. We check that we called the correct mutation. The first argument is not necessary, and we change that we called wrong action as well. So since it says root true, probably it's not belonging to batch comments. Let's see where it's actually coming from. So it's node store. In that case, we'll have to say use nodes, convert to discussion, and we'll mock the action on the use node store. So it doesn't do anything for us, and we should be good. All right, so it wasn't called. Let's double check what's going on here. Let's see if the action is called at all. It's not called. So probably it has something to do with the fetch drafts action that we are testing. Let's go to our store. So we do get our data here, and then we run our mutation, which is actually executed. So this is working fine. But then we don't call for the convert to discussion on use nodes. So we should get here, but we are not getting there. In that case, I would rather go inside the debugger or even start with here, because these drafts can be empty. I'm not sure what drafts are even referring to. Maybe it's not the state, it may be something different. Let's try to debug this. Yeah, and it's not stopping here. So that means we are probably getting inside the catch clause. Let's try to debug this inside the catch function. Yeah, like this. Yeah, so we see that drafts map is not a function. That means our mutation is probably running against the state that is not possible in the store. So let's see what the mutation actually does. And it expects drafts as an array, while in our case, let's see what it actually is. So fetch drafts is mocked to respond with an object. So this is already incorrect. Let's make it an object first. Let's see if it runs. So we are actually getting here, and yeah, this is running as expected. So this is changing to, I would probably change it just to res, and this should stay as is. Let's run this test without debugging. And this time it's actually calling convert to discussion, but it's not calling using discussion ID. Let's see why. So this one doesn't have discussion ID, right? So the first call is not doing what it's supposed to do. Let's try that again. Let's try another debugging session. So the first draft, let's use our console. So let's look at the draft object. It has an ID and isDraft equals true. So this is already false for our case, and this is true. But the draft object doesn't have discussion ID. Let's look it up. So this one mutated our draft state, but we don't have discussion ID here. So maybe the mutation was wrong. Actually, it wasn't. So what it did is just added isDraftTrue to this object. And that means that we actually didn't put correct data into our store beforehand. Let's try the second iteration. And the second iteration doesn't happen because we have just one object in the drafts. Let's try this again. So what I'm trying to see if the drafts, yeah, at this point we can't look it up. Let's try this one. Yeah, it only contains a single object. But we did define two. All right, I can see it. When we set the state, there were two drafts in the state, right? And when we run this mutation, set batch comment drafts, it actually sets the drafts to this single object. So this response. So now our drafts equals this object with isDraft equals true. So I'm not really sure what this test was testing, right? Because it basically reset all the state, and yeah, that's really weird. So I would rather do, say, discussion ID equals 2 and test it against that rather than trying to replicate what's going on here. So let's remove our debugging calls and see if it works now. So you will eventually encounter tests like this that are not properly testing the store. It's because it was using commit, dispatch, and context. These are all abstractions. These are not actual store code. This is just mocks that you provide with fake data, and in result you get tests that don't actually cover what your store is doing. So we're done with that test. Let's go to the next one. When you see things like this, you can usually remove it. So this is for batch comments getters that we can update, and root getters actually is not, I'm not sure what that means here. Actually, it's the case when it doesn't mean anything. So this was a leftover from many years ago, I guess. So we can safely remove that and go to the test. Let's see what it does. So we expect this to be called. Okay, so let's do this and do that. Let's see if we trigger these mutations. Yep. Same here. Let's replace actions with the store and see if it works. And it works. Similar story here, so I would rather do this. And we remove this data. And we're good. Next up is another big setup for the tests. That means something might go out of hand. So it defines context and params. Params is actually used, so context is not needed anymore, as well as commit. But I'm not sure about params. Yeah, this is params for the action call, so let's keep it. Getters, we already know it's batch comments. We don't need our context. We have this response, and we are good to actually change the tests. So let's see if the test works. Yeah, so others should work as well. This one is an interesting one. I'm a bit confused why we provide callback when we have promises, but anyway, maybe that is a required thing to do. The same story here. It's actually pretty straightforward fix. Same with here, remove context. Same here. So we update the draft and we expect alert to be called. And this callback. Let's see if it works. Nice, so we fixed the specs. Next up is discussions. Let's see what it does first. So this one set up some state. It set up drafts. We've explored earlier that we do have drafts here, so it should work. Then we simply say store expand discussion. I believe expand discussion is not defined in batch comments. Yeah, it's defined in nodes. So we'll have to say use nodes and expand discussion. And to ensure we don't actually call it, let's mock returned value. This is fake data, is not needed. Let's try it out. Yep, it works. Okay, this one is interesting because it calls for the div store and it has some complex setup. So we have this get discussion getter. I'm not sure which one it is. It's actually from nodes. So I would do this. I would do this legacy nodes getters equals this object, and the draft goes as an argument here. So this have to be kind of rewritten a bit. So let's see, use legacy divs. When you see calls like this, I usually mock it beforehand. So we expect it to have been called with this argument. And also we expect for the expand discussion to be called. I'm not sure which one it is, so it's from nodes. we provide the same arguments and we remove this. And let's see if it works. So it says that getDiscussion is not a function. So I guess this getter was a function. Let's fix that. One of our mutations was getting unexpected input. So we tried to go to discussions. Actually, in that case, I would rather mock it. So we are called for use nodes expand discussion. Yeah, and I just simply forgot to mock it. And it's good. The last one is testing for clear drafts. Should be straightforward again. Nice, and we fixed the whole action spec. Let's double check that everything works. Yep. To complete the process, I would go and commit the spec. So migrate action spec. And because we forgot to add this in another commit, actions, mutations, and getters, I will do this as a separate commit and I'll just join it with the one when we migrated our store. So this migration process should include this file, right? So let's combine them together. And we're done. Let's continue the migration in the mutations.js file. The setup is pretty simple. I would go and copy this line that initializes testing Pinia, and I would also copy the store definition. So we replace our state with the store. This one is no longer needed anymore. We probably don't need to define custom getters, but we'll see. Yeah, let's check if we need custom getters here. Yeah, in mutations usually you don't need to do this. So I would rather remove it. And again, as a good point of reference is to look at our existing migrations. So our diffs are migrated. Yeah, and it was using just a create testing Pinia call. Let's probably copy it in a similar fashion. We don't need any plugins here. And we are ready to migrate this thing. We can see a pattern here. So we call for mutations. It's actually not how you're supposed to test stores. So we replace all the mutations calls with the store calls. And I see a pattern here using state. So I would rather say just remove it completely. And when we say expect state, we should say expect store. Okay, I made a mistake somewhere. Yeah, this shouldn't be here. Let's see if that can be replaced easily. I think we are actually good. Okay, so this failed because we didn't have global accessor plugin. So that means we actually have to add it. Let's try again. Same problem here. We have to run legacy diffs before we run anything else. So I would say right after testing Pinia, we call for legacy diffs here because it's accessed implicitly. So some specs didn't get the state treatment. Okay, so I would say it's safe to completely remove this argument because it was using fake state. Now we are using proper store. Let's see if it works. And we've just migrated our mutation, so let's do another commit, migrate mutations, and we should be good. Last is our getters. I'm actually surprised it doesn't have as much getters. Let's double check if our store defines. Yeah, I guess it's just not properly covered with specs. So after we finished with this migration, I would go ahead and just cover all the getters with proper tests, because it's quite poorly covered. But anyway, we have to finish this migration. Let's go to getters. I would copy the code from the mutations. In this case, I would do the same thing I did previously. So I would do a patch that just defines this drafts state. And let's see if the draft for file is actually a function. I believe it's not. Actually it is. So it expects div file sha. Let's see if it works. So maybe there was a bug when we migrated our getters, because this now returns a function. All right, so I made a mistake. So instead of testing the store, I tested the getters from the legacy store. That is not what's going to, that should be done here. Let's try again. Yeah, and we just fixed our getter spec. Migrate getters. It's a easy migration, but we've done it. After we've done all of that, I would suggest getting through all of these commits, splitting them into multiple MRs. You decide which strategy is the best and go through the reviews. After you've done with that, you can work on component migrations, and that will be covered in another video. Thanks for watching.